Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Mike, host of the free iTunes podcast, Psychiatric Secrets Revealed with Dr. Mike, but that's not why I'm here today. This is another Saving Savvy episode, and this time we're going to look at some real world difficult pictures taken with the FZ200, which is the Panasonic super zoom premium camera. Now, what makes this camera so premium? Well, I did a whole review on it in the past, but it has a 26 times zoom, which certainly is not the biggest, but it has a constant f2.8 aperture throughout the entire zoom range. So you can get bigger zooms, but as they zoom out, the aperture gets smaller and smaller and smaller, so they're really only good if you're in bright light. And most of us, if you have kids, we're going to be at the high school gym taking pictures of that basketball game, or we're going to be at that junior high play or whatever, and they all have terrible lighting. And in fact, that's why I thought I'd do this particular video, because I was fortunate enough to go to my kids' junior high to see a performance of The Wizard of Oz. Now, I'd like to tell you that my kids were the star of the show. They weren't. They were the stars in my eyes because they were members of the crew, and they were very busy working behind the scenes, moving stuff around and doing all the things that the crew does, but it gave me an excellent opportunity to take pictures in very difficult conditions. So we're talking about a cafeteria that's converted into a theater with lighting that is what you would get in a junior high play, so really kind of a not such a good condition. I found that using the automatic feature was not good in this situation because it tended to use very slow shutter speeds. So I did do most of my shooting in program mode. I set a minimum shutter speed of 1/60th of a second because this is not a real fast moving play, and I set the ISO to intelligent ISO, which kind of adjusts for movement. If it sees movement, it will use a higher ISO. So let's take a look at some of those pictures to see how this camera really shines as basically, this is of course not a DSLR, it's a compact camera, but it really does pretty well in a very difficult situation. So I'm going to go to that screen now. Okay, in this picture you have Dorothy, and this ISO, all these will be at f2.8 by the way. ISO here is 800 and it's 1/160th of a second. I actually had to bring down the exposure compensation on all of the pictures down about one stop or a little bit more, simply because the camera was picking up all the lighting and was really overexposing the performer. So this is with the exposure compensation down about 1.3 on this particular picture, but pretty good for 800 ISO. And we're talking about a focal length equivalent of 285 millimeters. So wow, that's handheld, by the way. If we go into this shot here, we're at a focal length of almost 200 millimeters, 183 millimeters, ISO 1000. And if we zoom closer, you can again see that it's pretty sharp, very, very good for a compact camera, perfectly acceptable shot. Here we have the mayor and various members of the city of, I guess it's Munchkin. This is at an ISO of 800 at 124 millimeters. And if we zoom in on it again, you can see it looks pretty good. We're talking about, again, junior high lighting in a cafeteria. So this is where that f2.8 lens throughout the entire range really, really does its job. Here we have, again, Munchkin City. This is an ISO of 12,000 or 1,250. Yeah, 12,000 would be cool. With a focal length of equivalent of 124 millimeters, and not bad. And here we're at an ISO of 500 at 192, so we're back at that 200 millimeter mark, and looks very good. If we zoom in, also looks very good. You can see a little bit of, I would say, like a little bit of smearing on the picture, but not bad when you consider the incredible difficult lighting conditions that we're looking at. This is actually zoomed into 485 millimeters. So again, using that f2.8 really makes a difference. Shutter speed of 1/100th of a second and ISO of 800. Here we see the main characters, ISO 800, 1/60th of a second, and a focal length of 81 millimeters. When I zoom into that shot, looks pretty darn good for a basic compact camera sensor. And here we are at an ISO of 1000. We're at a focal length of almost 400 millimeters, and we're at 1/60th of a second. I guess we're at 1/160th of a second. Looks very good too. Nice and sharp and clear. No complaints. This is at an ISO of 400. We're at 200 millimeters approximately, 1/80th of a second. Bring it up close. The lion looks very good indeed. Again, we're talking about a 1/2.3 sensor. That constant aperture makes all the difference in the world. And here's another shot with a 200 millimeter approximately focal length at 1/320th of a second and an ISO of 1250. So pretty good. Close up also looks very good indeed. That's just basically a crop, of course. Here we see the witch, and you can see the difficult conditions. We're literally on the floor in folding chairs. They're up a little higher, and this was at the far end. I was at the opposite end of the room. So here, actually, we're talking about a focal length of only 75 millimeters, so I was pretty wide here, and a 1/160th of a second at an ISO of 1600. And if you zoom in, on this particular one, you can see some noise in the back of the head and kind of some noise in the curtain too. Not terrible, certainly usable, but definitely we're seeing noise here at 1600. But surprisingly, when we go to this scene, which is at the same point in the stage, it's also an ISO of 1600 and a 72 millimeter focal length, 1/60th of a second. Not a lot of noise. Zoom in, not a lot of noise. So I'm not quite sure the difference. Maybe that's some of the intelligent features of the camera, but did a fine job considering the size of the sensor. Here again, we're at an ISO of 1600, and we're at a focal length of 72 millimeters, 1/60th of a second. Not a lot of noise, really. I mean, there's noise, but not really that bad when you're talking about this size sensor. You zoom in again, not a lot of noise. Looks pretty darn good. And so there you have it. Let me kind of get out of this screen, go back down. So there you have it. There's a bunch of pictures taken in really adverse conditions. So you could really see using this FC200, which for some reason I often call the LZ200. I don't know what's going on, but I do. But it's the FC200. You can see using this in a lot of situations, from your kid's basketball game or maybe a nighttime football game that's illuminated with not so good lighting, or the school play. Things that as parents, we're really going to use these cameras. So don't be fooled by getting some 50 times zoom, but it goes down to this big of an aperture when you get out to the end, because you're not going to be able to use that camera in a lot of settings that have less than perfect light. This one does. It's not cheap, but it's certainly for what you're getting. You're getting a lot for the money. It's not small, but it's smaller than a big DSLR, and this is packing the equivalent of I think it's 600 some millimeter lens in this little body. Can you imagine if you were doing a DSLR? It would be this big, and it's all in this fairly little camera. So as I've recommended this in the past, I recommend it again for the intended purpose that it was designed for, and I hope those pictures give you some more insight into the power of this little compact camera. That's a super zoom. If you have some time, please give my podcast a listen. You can find it on iTunes and other podcatching sites. Just search for Michael Kuna, Kuna, or search for Psychiatric Secrets Revealed with Dr. Mike. Have a wonderful day.